Obviously, as people are listening to this conversation, the state of Iowa is beginning to reopen. Now, some statewide reopenings, including salons and barbershops. Well, that order was not in place in Texas for Shelley Luther. There are a lot of people who think that the punishment did not fit the crime there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, Jeff, that's exactly right. So Shelley Luther became somewhat of a household name, a folk hero, at least among small business owners. What basically happened in her case is she was balancing health and wealth, not just her own, but that of her employees, and decided to open her salon early in defiance of the governor's stay-at-home order. So she ended up getting jailed, not for cutting hair, but for contempt of court. A judge ordered her to close and basically said, hey, look, you can give an apology. You can say you'll close your salon. She said, I will not. So was sentenced to 7 days in custody. Now, interestingly, the Texas governor of all people gave her somewhat of a get out of jail free card by amending his order saying you can't go to jail for violating the stay-at-home rules, and then ended up letting everybody open a little bit early anyway. But she really stands for the proposition, not that we're going to glamorize law breaking or start a revolution, but how about starting a conversation between small businesses and government officials to argue we should be able to open safely. We have the precautions and the protocol in place, and we're safe to open just like all those other businesses you allow to remain open.
It is the sort of thing that as we talk about whether you can reopen, is it safe to do, et cetera, the one-size-fits-all approach is very difficult, and by all accounts, she had undertaken the precautions necessary. But again, to your point, there was no conversation.
That's right. And many small businesses have taken the precautions necessary. They have plexiglass, they're gloved, masked, social distanced. They make the arguments that if anybody took the time to come and look at what they've done to make sure their customers were safe and their employees, they'd be allowed to open right away. Now, Jeff, here's the wild card in this analysis. I don't know about you, but I'll bet our listeners have experienced, you walk into a store, all the employees, they've got masks and gloves and they're staying away. It's the consumers that are sauntering in, no mask, no gloves, laughing, coughing. This is not going to be helpful in making sure we don't have a secondary spread. When we say we're in this together, we don't just mean the small business owners. We mean us too. There has to be a way. I know they're uncomfortable, but it's worth it in the long run to be sensible and safe in the short term.
From the prosecutorial standpoint, and this is interesting to me because of your background, if you have a regulation or a rule and there's no punishment, there's no enforcement mechanism, that's the other side of this, right? What good is a governor's order if there is no enforcement mechanism? Address that if you would.
Well, there usually is enforcement mechanisms. It's usually a fine, but you point out something that's very tricky jurisdictionally is who has the power to create laws. Now, in a time of crisis, you're balancing personal choice versus public safety. Maybe there's a little more power given to the government that they might have under usual circumstances. But police don't want to be enforcing stay-at-home laws. We just emptied out our jails largely for some lower-level criminals. We're not going to now fill them with hairstylists and manicurists. And we're not going to, you hear about sting operations. You normally think that in connection with human trafficking and drug dealing, not doing nails out of your garage. So there's a natural disinclination of law enforcement to prioritize stay-at-home violators, even though we know that those can sometimes very much endanger the community. So we're still all sort of working it out, obviously prioritizing these offenses. And, you've heard the term social policing. This pandemic has been an example of social policing. We are trying to encourage each other to follow rules and regulations, whether they're black letter law or whether they're orders from the government.